back to the Catholic New Yorker. I'm Alex Basile, and we are now here in Midtown Manhattan, and it's quite a different scene from what this would have looked like in the 1800s. When we were down in Old St. Patrick's, and if this was the early 1800s when that church was built, if you looked over the walls, you would have saw a very, very different Manhattan. We talked about there were foxes in the churchyard of Old St. Patrick's. We're really, when Archbishop Hughes is going to say that I'd like at one point to build my main cathedral in what would be Midtown Manhattan, people thought he was out of his mind. They're going to call this Hughes's folly, because this Archbishop, who had this great vision, who had this great idea of what the Catholic world would be like in the New World, and especially in New York City, his thought is going to be very different than the people around him. If you remember from Old St. Patrick's, we had Mayor James Harper, and he was part of the nativist crew. People who certainly did not want Catholics to thrive in the United States, did not want them to thrive in New York City. There were riots all of the time, and what the idea of Bishop Hughes, he's going to try to set up a plan that the Irish and Catholics in general in the United States would be here to stay. So let's think about how we've come to this point in history. By the time we get to the mid-1800s, the Irish famine, 1847, kills more than 1 million people in Ireland. 2 million Irish Catholics end up leaving Ireland to settle here in the United States, most of which come through Ellis Island. And they're going to, of course, once they come through Ellis Island, it kind of serves as a funneling point to the United States. They are going to settle here in New York, and especially here in New York City. So if we talk a little bit about Archbishop Hughes, he will in 1817 leave Ireland to come to the United States. 1826, he is ordained, he's trained as a priest in Baltimore, and he will then later be ordained in Philadelphia. 1842 is going to be the timeline. Now he will be named Bishop of New York. And one of the things that we talked about, he's going to buy this plot of land right here. It's a full city block. We go from 5th Avenue all the way back to Madison. We were between 50th, and 51st Street, and right in the heart of New York City. But even back then, when people saw his dream, now they could see Old St. Patrick's, which was the original cathedral where the bishop spoke from. That's why he called it a cathedral. That was the place in which people saw, okay, if Catholics are going to kind of have their point, their centralized point in New York City, that would make sense. But not for Hughes. Hughes is pushing the idea that New York will be developed. He knows that there's so much land to be had, so that he's thinking really about everything that can go on north of Mulberry and that little area down in Spring Street. He's thinking all the way here in the north, and people obviously thought it was truly a folly. New St. Patrick's Cathedral is going to be built between 1859 and 1879. It's going to take 20 years to be completed. Partially, there's going to be a little delay in the middle of that time because of the Civil War. But Hughes's dream is going to take place right here in Midtown Manhattan. We are in front of the bronze doors that really give this cathedral its identity, its American Catholic identity. If you notice, up on top we have St. Joseph, who's going to be one of the patrons of our Universal Church. He is the patron of the Universal Church. Obviously, you have the patron of Ireland, who is St. Patrick, and he becomes the patron saint of our diocese here in New York City. Then moving down, we have a tribute to St. Isaac Jogues, who is going to be the first American martyr. And obviously he's going to, in his own way, help establish Catholicism here, or at least the roots of Catholicism here in the United States. We've spoken about him. He holds a very, very important place. Then you have Frances Cabrini, who is known as the mother or the patron saint of the immigrants. She really took care of many of the immigrants that settled here in the United States, especially the Italian immigrants. She's going to hold a very, very important role in not only American history, but especially in New York history. Then you have Kateri Tekakwitha, which, if you've ever been to Founders Hollow, you see the beautiful statue, which at the base has all of the turtles. She is going to be one of our very, very important American figures, especially in establishing Catholicism. And then finally, you have Elizabeth Ann Seton, who is going to have a place in American Catholicism, not only here in New York, but down in Baltimore. And she's going to help establish the Catholic schools, establish Catholic orphanages, and her place in American Catholicism, especially establishing the presence in New York, educating young Catholics in the faith, is going to really set up the future of our church. We always say the youth are the future of the church. That's going to be her important role as we move forward. So when Bishop Hughes is trying to establish the Catholic presence in America, he's trying to make people realize that the Irish and Catholics in general have an important place in the growth of America. There have been riots at this point in Philadelphia, in Baltimore. Churches and convents are being burnt down. The nativists want to scare the Catholics out of the country. They want to get rid of them. They want them to realize that they have no place here in this country. The building of this new and impressive cathedral will show that the Irish are here to stay. So one of the things that he's going to do is he really wants to try to get a legitimate architect, someone whose work that he really, really loved, and that would be James Renwick. James Renwick is going to be hired after they hold a contest. He's going to see that Renwick had built Grace Church down on 10th and Broadway. And what Renwick did with that is that he brought a European grace to America. And that's what Hughes is going to want for his church here. He is going to ask Renwick to bring that same grace that he did to his other church, aptly named, to his beautiful new cathedral here in the center of Manhattan. And Renwick is going to model his design after the great cathedral in Cologne and also after Notre Dame. So he's going to combine those two churches into what we find here, these two incredible spires that are going to really stand as the highest point in New York, the biggest church in America. This church that's going to state that Catholicism is important, that it's important not only to the United States, but it's important to the universal church. So after James Renwick designs this incredible cathedral that is going to be modeled after two of the most iconic cathedrals in Europe, in Cologne and in Paris, now Hughes has a major problem. How do I pay for this? So one of the things that he will do is he will identify 100 donors, wealthy New Yorkers and wealthy Americans, that he's going to ask for $1,000 each. That will be the starting point for his capital campaign to build this incredible church. What people will not realize is that this church is going to really be built on the pennies and single dollars of Catholics in the United States, but really here in the New York area. A lot of the immigrants who came here served as housemaids, as butlers, and a lot of the women from other ethnicities, they were not allowed to work outside the house, but the Irish were. And they referred to these because so many of these women were called Bridget. They were known as the Bridgets. So these maids, as they went out and they took care of the house and they served as nannies and they served as cooks all around the New York area, they start to donate to this fund. And the Bridgets are going to end up helping to build this cathedral 1 penny, 1 cent at a time. Their donations are not going to be large, but little by little, they're going to add to the capital campaign of this beautiful church. So in 1858, the cornerstone of the new St. Patrick's is going to be laid. Now, the problem in the 1860s in the United States will be the Civil War. Everything comes to a halt. There certainly is no time to put into this church when obviously most of the people were off fighting in the war. So everything will stop. Unfortunately, in 1864, Archbishop Hughes dies. He will never get to see his dream of this cathedral completed. Bishop McCluskey is going to become cardinal here in the New York area, and it will be his endeavor after the war to now restart this campaign to try to really come and to finish this cathedral. It's not going to be an easy task. There's not a lot of money around. So little by little, he's going to start accumulating enough money to be able to continue the building of the cathedral. In 1878, the fundraising will culminate. And really what happens is they open up the cathedral and they end up having like a major flea market inside that took place for about a month or so. And they end up raising about $200,000. That money will help McCluskey finish this cathedral. Incredibly, little bit at a time, and through really just almost even $1 at a time, people are going to help support this crazy endeavor that you started about 20 years earlier. But now we're going to see it finally complete. So looking back in history, we really have these 1,400 women that really kind of piloted this flea market inside this church. We have them to really thank for the building of this incredible cathedral. It will be 1879 that the cathedral will be dedicated. About 7,000 people will come here, and the 20-year project will finally come to a conclusion. One of the issues is going to be that there's really just never enough money in order to kind of really finish the church the way that Hughes and even Renwick had planned. So what Renwick does is this incredible technique. He's going to really, inside the church, and we'll show some pictures as we go through the tour, you're going to see that what he does is that everything above 30 feet is going to move from marble to just plaster. So as you stand on the floor of the cathedral, and as you look up towards the heavens, what seems like marble, what seems like very expensive stone, is really only going to be plaster. It's going to be a much more inexpensive technique, and for Renwick, it's going to enable him to really complete this cathedral in a way that's economical and really practical. As time goes on, Fifth Avenue is going to become the home to the wealthiest New Yorkers. And as you heard, you hear during even my presentation here, you hear the bells ringing. There are a total of 19 bells that ring from the top of this cathedral, and it could be heard, especially in the time of McCluskey, and the completion of the church could be heard from miles around. And that was the object, to really call people to worship, but also to let the rest of the world know that Catholics are going to hold a special place in the spiritual development of this country. If you take an overhead view of the church, we're going to see that it has the shape of a Latin cross. So it's going to be intentionally designed that way, as many of these cathedrals, especially in Europe, are. as you go down below the altar, and we'll take a special peek at this altar now, that beneath the altar you're going to have the 9 deceased bishops and also other famous New Yorkers. I believe even Pierre Toussaint is buried underneath the altar. You're going to see that people are going to use this place as the central point of Catholicism here in New York. In 1906, behind the church, Our Lady's Chapel is going to be added, and that was really the only major extension of the church that occurred after the completion in 1879. So this centralized place in New York is going to be, throughout the history of New York, it will serve as the place where we will have the funeral mass for people like Babe Ruth, Ed Sullivan, Robert F. Kennedy after his assassination. If you've ever seen the many different tributes and even funerals after 9/11, many took place from this beautiful place. And it really served as a place of consolation, especially in times of real despair in New York. About 20 years ago, they started to plan the renovations for this cathedral. The outside had become darkened with all of the soot and all of the basically the grime from the city. So it will be really during Cardinal Dolan's tenure here that we will see the great restoration of St. Patrick's. One of the things that's going to occur during the restoration is that they're going to go back to Renwick's drawings, and they're going to realize that none of his drawings are actually accurately depicted with the final building. So they realized that as they were building the cathedral, the builders actually took a lot of liberties with Renwick's original renderings. So what they had to do when they were restoring the cathedral is that they actually had to redraw the plans based on what was actually here. And that was a major endeavor that became a little easier with the computerization of architectural design. But that's really going to be really a major undertaking. They're going to work on the marble, especially the restoration of the marble, and they're going to realize that, especially going through the records, that he went to, James Renwick that is, he went to a quarry up in Tuckahoe, New York, and he's going to find his marble for his cathedral up in Tuckahoe. And what the restorers are going to do is they're going to go through this quarry, find as much marble as they can, even in the local area, in some of the buildings that had now fallen into ruin, and they're going to take as much marble from the surrounding area that they can, so to match the original marble that Renwick put into his church. So that would be a major process. And the other thing, like I said before, if you noticed, and they realized this the higher they went up in the cathedral, that really once you got above 30 feet, you really saw that there was less and less stonework. Even the plaster had been painted in a special way with a special technique that made it look like stone, the many different colors. So what the restorers will do is that they will go back and they will take paint samples through the inside of the church, and they're going to try to match Renwick's original paint colors that he put into his church. Because of this painted plaster, a lot of that plaster is going to end up falling down as we get into the later 19th century. The bronze doors that we have shown throughout the video, they were taken off the church and they were restored by a famous company in Queens. That took, I believe, a few years to do. Everything was such a part of a meticulous process that really becomes a great love of art and even a great love of faith. One of the things that had changed throughout the 1900s, in 1903, it will be Pius X that will basically issue a decree that says that he wants to go back to Gregorian chant. Now, with Gregorian chant, if they were going to do it in the, well, called, quote, proper way, it would exclude women. So really from the early 1900s all the way until like even the 1960s, and probably one of the first times that you will hear people sing, women sing here in this cathedral in the 1900s, will be at Robert F. Kennedy's funeral. The decree of Pius X basically eliminated women from musical liturgy here. And it will be really after Vatican II, and it will be after the RFK funeral, that little by little women will be added back into the music ministry. And now we actually have a woman that heads the music ministry here at the cathedral. The pipe organ, which is comprised of 9,000 pipes, was taken apart. That was brought to a company in New Jersey, and that took about 3 years to restore. Imagine 9,000 pipes that they have to resolder, rework, repolish in order to restore them to their original grandeur. In the cathedral we have 75 stained glass windows. And if you ever get to come to the cathedral, I would recommend that you really come through during the day, and you could see the brilliant colors that Renwick and the original designers really wanted you to see, because now they've been restored to that original glory after the restoration. There's a founder's window, and Renwick, like a lot of other cathedral designers, is going to put himself into that founder's window. And in this stained glass window you see Renwick with Hughes and McCloskey going over the plans to the cathedral. One of the things that we really want to think about when it comes to St. Patrick's, and if I know during maybe even right before Christmas, right across the street we have Rockefeller Center. One of the things that we really want to get from this beautiful place is to understand our Catholic faith, how we have found our place in the United States. Catholics are an important part of the American history. Now 45% of Catholics here in New York are Hispanic. There's a new immigrant wave. We always have to be able to welcome the immigrant and to understand that every single immigrant has their story of prejudice, of even times in which they didn't even know if they found their place here in their new country. But St. Patrick's Cathedral is here to remind us that not only do we have our faith, but we have a place, and that place is with God. So as we move forward, let's think about that importance of our faith, and let's not take that faith for granted.